Thank you for coming to this to one of the cool stuff sessions. As a reminder right now, there's 3 sessions going on at the same time. This is one of them. And I'm going to let you know, actually, Christiana, can you start recording for us? I'm going to let you know about recording once we have started recording. And I just realized that I don't know how to tell that. So as many of you may have known, we are learning how the technology works on the fly. And so please bear with us here. All right, looks like we're recording, great. So this is first just to let you know that we are recording this session and we're recording all of the sessions happening right now. So if you're looking, you want to see what the other ones had in them, you'll be able to check that out in a recording later. We're planning on posting all of them so you can review them. We retain the rights to rebroadcast them and distribute that recording. And by taking part in this, you're agreeing that your contributions will become part of that recording that we share. And that includes the video, the audio for the presenters, chat, and the Q&A. So welcome to our first, or one of our cool stuff sessions. This is basically a lightning round. It's a series of short 5-ish minute talks giving you a quick series of ideas about interesting things that our presenters have done with mastery grading. The theme of this one is focus on students. And so these are more focused on supporting and helping students in interesting and especially effective ways. So the way this is going to work, especially presenters, so that you know, I am in control of the slides unless you need screen sharing for some other purpose. And so if you want me to advance at some point and I have, dozed off and accidentally forgotten about it, please just go, David, please, next slide, or backwards, or whatever you like, and that's what I'll do. And so that is essentially everything. If you want to see the other things happening right now, this is a list of them, and so you are more than welcome to leave one of this session and go to another one right now, or check out the recordings later. With that, we're going to start with our first speaker. Sorry, one last thing I wanted to say, which was we probably will have time for a few questions from attendees after each of these. It will be very limited, and so you could put some in the Q&A. We will hope to answer those, or you can also raise your hand and I will call on you. The chat is hard to follow, and so the chat is not where we'll be looking for questions that you want to ask directly to the presenters. So as a reminder, Q&A panel or raising your hand, and we will have a couple people able to ask those questions. All right, with that, let's get started. So our first presenter is Priya Prasad, who will be speaking on the excellence economy.
All right, hopefully nothing terrible has happened to my audio since we last tested this. All right. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to talk about something that I call the excellence economy. This is something that my paper for the Primus Mastery Grading special issue actually covers as well. So if you want to get in more detail, there is more detail, and I'm very happy to answer any questions by email. Next slide, please. Some of the problems, I've been implementing mastery grading, specifications grading specifically, since 2015. And so some of the things I noticed that came up is that knowing that they can revise their work means that sometimes students don't really turn in their best effort on the first attempt. They just sort of throw some spaghetti at the wall and hope something sticks, which is a pretty normal way for students to do math homework. And I definitely wanted to push them beyond that. Sometimes that's all students have bandwidth for. I have a lot of students who work full-time or part-time, at least 20 hours a week. So that is completely fine. But if they don't have to do it, I don't want them to do it. The other thing is, insisting on work being turned in on time seems antithetical to the underlying principles of mastery grading, where we care that students learn, not when students learn. And really, on the other hand, you don't want to get to the end of the semester with this just avalanche of grading and a whole bunch of people turning stuff in at like the last minute because you haven't enforced any deadlines. So I was trying to figure out, how can I walk that line without penalizing students for turning things in late or turning in work that's not great, but incentivize them to not do that. So next slide, please. So tokens, if you know anything about specifications grading, tokens are a mechanism that are used in specs grading. A lot of times it denotes that a student has done something extra, or there's like a flexible list of things that they can opt into doing and they get tokens to come out of it. And these present a really good opportunity to establish what I'm irresponsibly calling an economy in the classroom. It's not an economy. They don't get to exchange with each other, but they get to, like, they earn this money and then they pay it back to me. So maybe it's more like a company store. And the token specifically that I actually use is, you know, those little gold star stickers that you get in elementary school for behavior. That's actually what I use on their work. I do it with my pre-service elementary teachers. They absolutely love it. I inherited one of those sticker sets from a colleague many years ago who said, "You teach elementary teachers, you know what to do with this." I didn't, but this is now what I do with it. So these tokens basically are ways to, sorry, I'm seeing your chats and they're hilarious. These are just a way to really get students to earn something, and then they can spend these tokens. I think I want the next slide. I'm hoping I want the next slide. Okay, so how do students earn tokens? I have a collection of writing assignments and also problem sets in my elementary ed course. And so if their first attempt is on time, so this is where I try to motivate them to turn something in on time, shows deep mathematical thinking. So it doesn't necessarily have to be correct, but it does have to be thoughtful, right? It has to show that they've spent some time and tried to dig in and try to talk or explore beyond just what is the right answer. That's when they earn a token. And thorough and complete for their writing assignments is to make sure they've answered every single question. Again, not necessarily correct or in a mathematically valid sort of way, but in some way that shows that they've thought about it. So then they earn these tokens. I believe I have the opportunity for them to earn up to 12 stars throughout the semester. Nobody earns all of them. I think the most that anybody ever gets is 10, and that's very rare still. But then what they can do is they can then use these tokens to turn what are more traditionally summative assessments in my course into formative assessments. They're not allowed to revise late work normally, but with one token, they can buy a revision of late work. With 2 tokens, they can retake some of our quizzes that we have throughout the semester. And the final exam, which is a mock certification exam, so it's supposed to feel like their actual certification exam for their EC6 certification in Texas. All they have to do is pass it at the level they would have to pass it if they were taking the real certification exam in order to get at least a C in the class. So if they don't pass it the first time, they can retake the final exam for 3 tokens. So usually what I see is everybody really pushing themselves to get themselves at least those 3 tokens, because here's what it is. Most of the students who get there don't need to retake the final exam. Most students don't retake the final exam, but everybody wants to be there because they feel so much better about having this opportunity to retake the final exam, especially since it's more or less a pass-fail exam. All right, I got one more slide, I think. This has really changed some great classroom dynamics. One is that it has shifted the focus from penalizing developing work and tardiness to incentivizing effort, even if it's not, you know, correct effort, and timeliness. Early effort reaps these second chances later in the course, which is really, really, really great. And extra credit opportunities. I used to be very against extra credit when I was doing traditional grading. Now I have all sorts of extra credit opportunities because all they do is buy you an opportunity to redo or revise work again and again instead of replacing things that I consider required and important to the class. All right, I think that's me.
Great. Thank you very much. And we do have a couple questions. Let's say take a minute or two. And one that I saw coming through the chat, just came in the Q&A also, from Zoe. Do you find that the tokens end up giving extra chances to the students who need them the least?
So yes and no. They end up giving chances to almost everybody, and then the students who need them the least just don't use them. What I've noticed is for a lot of students in my class, this is really a way to reward effort more than it is a way to reward like meeting the standard, which I think is also pretty important. So I have found, for the most part, just about everybody in my class gets to a point where they get at least 3 stars and have a second chance at the final exam. Sometimes I make sure that happens. So yeah, this is where subjectivity, I think, can sometimes work in your favor, as we were talking about earlier in one of the chats.
I'd like to do one more, a pair of related questions I think would be good right here. There's 2 questions. One is the retake quiz a different quiz? And the other one then is, could you say something about how many homework assignments, quizzes roughly do you have in a semester? So how many opportunities?
Yeah, so yes, the quizzes are different, not hugely different. My quizzes are basically the least important part of my entire grading system, but they do test basic skills. So yeah, that sometimes I just have to make sure that their basic skills are up to par. I have 5 problem sets that are 10 problems each throughout the semester, and those are actual problem sets. They're not like little exercises. They're legit problems that people have to work on and write about. And then I have 7 reading assignments, which have an associated essay that they have to write about and reflect on the reading and answer questions based on the reading. So that comes out to 12, I believe. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. I think we do need to move along. And I'm afraid we do have relatively short time for these things. So thank you very much, Priya.
All right, I'll still be here.
And if there are questions you're missing, there are options. You could do a private chat message to any of the speakers who you'd like to ask an individual question about. All right, I would like to move on then to our next speaker, who I believe needs screen sharing. Jason, is that true? Still muted, Jason.
Are you going to run the slides, or am I going to run the slides?
I'm afraid I don't have any slides.
You don't have any slides?
Nope, I'm sorry. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I can share.
That must be my mistake. I'm sorry.
That's right. So yeah, I can share them. I'm ready.
Okay. Do you have permission to do that? Otherwise, I can do that if you need.
I do not have, it's not letting me share the screen while other participant is sharing.
Okay, I will stop sharing then. All right, hang on just a second while we get this set up.
So we'll do this kind of low tech. Here's my web browser. Can people see that? Everybody good? Good, great, thanks Asia. And I'm not gonna make it pretty like Priya's beautiful slides where mine are really basic, right? I went to a talk once where somebody gave slides on an overhead and they called it Bubba Paint instead of, you know, PowerPoint, Bubba Point. So I'm close to that. Hi everybody, my name is Jason Miller. I'm at Cal State University Channel Islands in Camarillo, California. I want to talk about something that I did this year. It seems really trivial, so I hope somebody finds value in it, but it's asynchronous assessment for mastery grading. So the story is, before COVID-19 hit on March 13th, I was doing mastery grading. I had learning target quizzes, or learning targets for students. And every Thursday I would give them short quizzes to assess against a learning target. And I allowed students to choose their learning targets by filling out a Google form on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, probably Tuesday night. And I would look at their selections and I would print each student out a copy of the quiz for the learning target they wanted to be assessed on. And I would bring them to class on Thursday. And that worked out pretty okay. It was pretty intensive on my part, but that's okay. That's not what I'm trying to talk about. The problem happened on March 13th when our universities closed down. We went to a virtual instruction environment. I still wanted a method to regularly assess my students, okay, that gave them the ability to choose what they wanted to be assessed over, just like I had before COVID shut us down. It also gave students time to master what they wanted to be assessed over, and then it also limited their temptations to cheat. So on the cheating idea, I don't worry about cheating. When I went to my undergraduate school had a really strict honor code, And every course I've taught, every class I've taught, I really bring that into my classroom, and I emphasize why integrity is really important. So when I give my classes an exam, I tell them I'm going to trust them, and I leave the room. So I don't even proctor my own exams. So my students have been prepared. They knew that I took integrity seriously. So that's one of the reasons I wasn't really worried about cheating.
Jason, can I interrupt you for just a second and
Yes.
ask you to hit the present button? And I think that might make things larger for people who are viewing.
Is that better?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay. So when the university shut down, I had to make a pivot, and that it shut down right about the time I was going to give a midterm. So I stole something from Robert Talbot, where he talks about teaching students to upload PDFs. And so I had my students practice uploading a PDF scan of their work to our Canvas learning management system. And they all were able to do that. That was great. They could use whatever tool they wanted to. And then I gave my exam as kind of a distributed take home and required that they uploaded a PDF of their work. And that worked out great. Everybody uploaded it on time. And I was really proud. And so this got me to thinking that this might be how I should do all of my assessment going forward. And so what I did then is I loaded up all my quizzes as PDFs into Google Drive. So here's what I'm presenting on. This is the reason I'm here. Okay, this is my system for giving students agency to take the learning target quizzes when they want. I uploaded all the quizzes to Google Drive, and then I created a Google form for each quiz. So when students wanted to make the request of taking a quiz, they fill out a form, and then Google creates a pop-up that tells them the URL to download the PDF. Okay, so Google is my intermediary to give them access to the quiz, and the students can do this anytime they want to. My tokens and my number of assessments per week were out the window by this point. So they can download the quiz, and then Google records who downloaded the quiz and when they downloaded the quiz. So I get a sense of when they start the quiz, and I tell them they should take 20 or 30 minutes to take the quiz. So it is kind of a timed quiz. And then in Canvas, our learning management system, I created an assignment that goes along with that learning target. And then they take the PDF scan of their work on that assessment and upload it to Canvas. And in Canvas, I get a timestamp so I can figure out how long they took to take the quiz. So it's kind of timed. They feel like there's somebody looking at them, watching them do their work. And then inside Canvas, I can do the assessment. Canvas has a nice iOS app for grading work that's submitted through Canvas, or you can grade it through a web interface. But this made evaluation and assessment of student work really easy. And then the students have access to their graded work right away. So this is the tool I'm presenting on. Putting my quizzes into Google Drive, making a Google form so a student can get it whenever they want it, and it starts a clock. And then the student uploads the quiz to Canvas, and that stops the clock, and it makes assessment easy. So students can decide what they want to do and when they want to do it, and that preserves the agency that I was going for. So the caveat emptor on all this is not all students could print out the quiz at home, and so I had to figure out ways to help them with that. Cheating was still a temptation, and some students succumbed to it, but they fessed up when I asked them about it, so that was a win. And then creating the infrastructure of uploading the quizzes and making the pop-ups and the assignments took time, but now I can recycle that for using it in the fall. So this is what I wanted to share with you. I'm happy to speak more about it offline, but if you've got a learning management system and access to Google, this is something that really worked for me in a time when I had to virtualize a course that otherwise was face-to-face. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. We have a couple of somewhat technical questions here that I want to make sure we get answered. So Jason, can you say first just which course was this for and what was the level of that course?
This is a Calc 1 course.
All right. And is the Google form linked within the Canvas assignment, or is this a separate item entirely?
The Google form, the link to the Google form is in Canvas. So you can initiate everything from within Canvas.
So this is all within Canvas. Is there a particular reason to use that as opposed to using the tools within Canvas to allow them access to similar things?
Canvas didn't let me have a timestamp for when it began and when it ended, and I wanted to be able to write in LaTeX my quizzes. And so I didn't quite know how to get Canvas to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, there's one last question I think we can answer live, and that was, did you have any particular concern about students sharing the quiz links with each other? I know you mentioned your opinion on not worrying about cheating. Any thoughts on that?
That's where the dishonest work came in. They did share, but I could kind of see that in the work when it was submitted. So I sniffed it out, but students fessed up to it when I asked them. And the pop-up that appears in Google reminds them about academic integrity and why being honest is important. So they get a couple reminders not to do it, but really it doesn't depend upon students wanting to be honest.
And I want to really agree for everybody. I understand the concerns about integrity, and that reminding students about it has an outsized effect. It really does. So thank you again, Jason. I'd like to move to our next presenter, Britney Valhalla, and I need to share my screen again first. So pardon me as I make sure the right thing is showing, because this is always more of a difficulty than it should be. Indeed.
And while you do that, if people want to shoot me questions through the chat, I've seen them, they've gone by, I haven't been able to look at them. I'm happy to give my contact information and we can have conversations offline.
All right, I'm hoping that this is showing something sensible right now. I'm hoping that it is. Let's see.
There we go.
How about now? Let's see.
There it is.
All right,
That's it.
We're good. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with me on this one. So our next speaker is Britney Valhalla, who will be speaking about easing nerves and building confidence.
Thanks, David. And good job saying my last name. People are often intimidated by it. You did it very well. So yeah, as David said, I'm going to talk about just some of those things at the beginning of the semester that I do in order to ease nerves and build confidence. So the first thing is, because, and you can go on, thank you, introducing the grading system, because mastery grading tends to lend itself to a quite lengthy syllabus. I try to introduce those details of the syllabus gradually. So day one, I'm more focused on why I chose to do this type of grading, but not necessarily its details. And so in that, the why becomes all about them. I pique their interest to read the whole syllabus by telling them we're not going to have partial credit. And that's usually enough for them to panic a little bit and go, I got to read about this, right? And so to ease that initial panic in class, I also tell them on the first day that we will have multiple opportunities to assess and reassess these learning objectives that I have lined out for the course. But I hope what that does is it tells them, you need to read this carefully outside of class, but today what I'm going to do on day one is tell you about why I chose this. So I do things like say, this type of grading system really encourages and supports a growth mindset of learning. And so we talk a bit, and I show videos, which I'll say on the next slide in a little bit, or I show at least a video about growth mindset, which is maybe something that some have heard of, but most haven't in most cases. I also tell them that this grading system helps to ease your test anxiety because of the sheer number of opportunities that they're going to get to show me that demonstrated understanding. And then also that this grading system was chosen because it accommodates individual learning paces. And even though we are restricted to the calendar of that academic semester, this allows them to go into an exam thinking, okay, I think I get 3 out of the 6 things we talked about. I'm going to do those really well. I'm going to try my hardest at the other 3, but maybe I'm going to have to come back to those later. So it acknowledges those students who might need some more time on those things. So day one is all just mostly about this grading system might look really confusing. It might look more detailed than a percentage based grading system, but it was really chosen with you in mind, with you as my focus. And just I start the communication with them by telling them my why. In weeks 1 and 2, and David, you can click on next, is all about ask me questions. Just from your reading, what are you curious about? What do you want to know how it works? This was mentioned by Kate and others in the last session in the Q&A and the panel of those kind of the first day thing is really a first couple weeks at least. Like I almost said the first at least 1 or 2 weeks. I start class by asking them, what questions do you have about our grading system? And I do that every single day for at least the first 2 weeks, and then usually at least once a week after that. Just to let them know, I'm here to answer your questions and I want you to understand this, so tell me about it. I include space in the syllabus for students to record their questions while they read. Like it's a big space for them. Say questions about the grading system, so they know while they're reading it, they have a place they can always flip back to and bring those questions to class. So I really try to create an environment where those questions are encouraged and then answered in front of class. I also tell them if in case they are shy about asking their questions, that they're more than welcome to email me or come stop by my office and I'll explain things. Something else that I didn't put on here, but I heard from other people in the Q&A earlier that I do as well, is I try to do an assessment pretty early on. Like in the first week, we usually have an assessment, and I tell them they're going to learn this system by doing. And just like I want them to learn the math by doing, right? So I have them do a first assessment, and then we can talk about after that what goes on. But throughout all of this discussion, I remind them that this decision was made for them. This is to encourage them to cultivate a growth mindset, and like that little icon, which I thought was just really cute, so I included, they are really capable of amazing things, and sometimes it's okay if it's going to take you a little bit longer than the person sitting next to you in class, or on Zoom with you in class if this continues. So next slide. So a few videos to check out. This was the first video, The Power of Belief, Mindset and Success, by Eduardo Briseño. It's an 11-minute TED Talk where he goes through and he gives some of the brain science behind growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I thought it was a really great introduction. It was one of the first videos that was brought to my attention when I was starting into this grading and also just kind of growth mindset in general. And I showed this in class, and I thought it was really great. It was perceived really well. There's a little bit of a feedback issue with the sound on this one, so that might mess with some of you guys. So maybe video 2. So next click. Video 2 is an animated message, so you can see kind of the screenshot from that up at the top. This one's 7 minutes long, so if you have a shorter class period, I switched to this one because it was a shorter video, but still gave me the same type of great content because it was summarizing Mindset by Carol Dweck. And the speaker also provides a one-page PDF link, or link to a one-page PDF summary of the book. So that's a great resource for the students. So I've used that one as well. The speaker uses his own, a story of his own about basically productive failure and training your brain to learn more. And then lastly is something called the Super Mario Effect by Mark Rover. So this one's a little bit longer. It's a 15-minute TED Talk. Mark Rover is a popular YouTuber nowadays. He was a NASA engineer years ago. I haven't shown this one to my students, but I found it recently, and I'm going to, because he talks about mastery learning and the idea of viewing life tasks as a game to be conquered rather than a chore. And I think you can translate a lot of that into mathematics and other courses and learning in general, right? And how the grading system supports that type of mindset. So the Super Mario Effect, I'm going to scooch in so I can see. It says, focusing on the princess and not the pit to stick with the task and learn more. So that was his little tagline on that. I like that one in particular too, because Mark Rover, his videos might have become a little bit more visible in all this COVID stuff. He did one on like germs and stuff. The squirrel one was freaking hilarious. Yes. I loved that video. So I think my students might be more interested in just watching him. He has a really engaging way of speaking. But those are just some of the resources, some of the things that I do. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody about more.
Thank you very much. We have a chance for one quick question if there are any, but I don't see any in the Q&A. Okay, so I'd like to move to our next speaker here, Henry Boateng. We will see if I did well on the name pronunciation here as well, but Henry speaking on Proficient Minus, get out of jail free card.
Okay, you did fine. You did better than most. Okay.
Is that mastered or progressing?
Proficient minus. All right. So, can we go to the next slide? This is just, yes. So, this is how I do the module assessments. Essentially the final grade is based on the student's mastery on the assessments. And then there's homework and quiz grades, but they just bring you up by a third or bring you down by a third of a letter grade. So I have these 4 levels: proficient, intermediate, intermediate minus, and beginner. Okay. But then sometimes, so it's pretty clear, proficient means you mastered everything, and beginner means it's not going well. And then you can see intermediate. But then sometimes you'd have someone, or most of the time, some people will make a little too many mistakes. Or maybe like Amanda Hirsch was referring to earlier, you have 5 problems or 4 problems, and they do great on all of them but one. And you see, this is not someone who is progressing, this is someone who's almost mastered it. So what do you do? So what I picked was, I decided I'll give them a proficient minus. And then how do they go about acquiring a proficiency or mastery on it? Can we go to the next slide? Okay. And so the question is, do they have to retake the assessment? Okay. And I didn't want the students to do that. I said, okay, I'll give you a proficient minus, and then you have to come to office hours to clear it up. And what you do is you come and you work on a similar problem in office hours. And it's not, the focus isn't on, you have to come in, it's like an exam environment, you have to get it, and then if you don't get it, it's wrong. You don't get the proficiency. No, it's really on studying, on learning. So maybe you do it, you don't get it quite well, and then we go over it, and then you solve another problem like that. This is how we do it. In this way, you have students, they'll come by, they'll talk to you, you'd have a very good connection to your students. And then when we moved to online, that became a little bit of a challenge. And so I gave an assessment and I posted the grades, that the levels, and one student is like, what do you want me to do to clear the proficient minus? Should I solve a problem? I said, great. I can just email them that, hey, you got a proficient minus on this problem. Can you solve it again and submit it before we come to class? And that's another way to get students to clear up their minus. So in that way, you don't have to come up with new questions. Just email them before with their grade. And that's, of course, this is, I had 40 students in my class, and maybe about 3 or 4 of them will be proficient minus. So it's easy to email them. You don't have to email 40 students about this. But the focus is students get to learn. They realize that, okay, I need to get better at this. And I can just do it. I'll do it in office hours. I'll work a little bit more on the problem, make sure I get it down, and then I get my proficiency. Okay, and that's about it. I think that's like 2 minutes.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? So I don't see anything in Q&A, but if you'd like to ask one, we have a minute or 2 here. And while I'm waiting for anybody to type, I just want to mention, I may have gotten this idea from you, Henry, or from somebody else.
It's possible.
And it has been a huge both time saver and frustration saver for my students, right? No, I don't have to redo that again. because I'm right there. I just have to show you this last little piece. It's a great thing. Okay, so, there we go. I do see a question. Do you have issues with students who can't attend office hours? Which I think you sort of addressed in terms of how you dealt with it after our big pivot.
Okay, yes. So this it's a semester long, and I put a star next to semester long. So you don't have to come right after the assessment to clear it up. Sometimes some students will come like end of the semester. It's like, oh, I had a proficient minus on assessment 1, module 1. Can I clear it up? It's like, yeah, of course, you're here to learn. That's perfectly fine. So, and sometimes I have, I'll just make appointments with them outside of office hours to do it.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're going to move to our next speaker. So thank you, Henry. And next up, here we go, Christy Palat, who will be speaking to us about Convince Me.
So this is actually, you did a good job of organizing the talks, because if you want to go to the next slide, just a little bit of context. So I did these Convince Me conversations in Calc 1, where we were using a 4-tiered mastery-based testing. And I'm going to focus in on the excellent and progressing on my rubric there. So this rubric was modified from one Kate Owens shared. So really similar to what Henry just shared. The excellent level is, I tell the students, all right, you got this. You don't need to study this particular objective anymore. And then the progressing, our P level, is where they're just not quite there. So this is really meant to be super encouraging to the students. You've made really good progress, but I think you would benefit from studying this topic a little bit more. So this, if you want to go to the next slide. So what the Convince Me conversations were really oral exams, but I never used those words with my students. And if I could go back and edit what I sent to my students when we switched from in-person classes to virtual, this is what I would have sent them. So historically what we've done is to improve from a P level mastery to an E level mastery, we had the students just do the written assessment again. So they did reassessments just like they would with any other levels. But with the switch from face-to-face to virtual, I added these in an attempt to reduce the stress. So essentially gave the students a choice. They could keep doing it written assessments, or they could have these Convince Me meetings where the emphasis really is that it was a student-led conversation where the burden was on the student to come with evidence and an argument for why I should improve their grade from a P to an E. And it wasn't a guarantee. So just by having the meeting with me, you didn't automatically get bumped up from a P to an E. You had to come in and convince me that you actually did understand the concept at an excellent level of mastery. The thing I messed up when I first sent it out was not emphasizing enough that they are student-led conversations. So we had to clarify that a bit. If you want to go to the next slide. So a couple of, looking back over what was a very odd semester, a couple of the things that I noticed that were somewhat surprising for me is the students know, so about 50% of my students took advantage of these meetings, and the students who did loved it. They were super excited to tell me why I gave them a P and not an E, and what mistakes they had made, and explain why the mistake had been big enough to not get complete mastery. And why they wouldn't make the mistake if they did that assessment again. I was also surprised, I was nervous when I added this in. The meetings were relatively little work for me, so I used the appointments feature of Google Calendar, so the scheduling was pretty automatic. And I'd also, because I restricted this only to students who had already demonstrated mastery at that almost there, but should study a little bit more, not quite done with this topic. It was a relatively small number of meetings. So I wasn't gonna having all the students every week requesting meetings with me. The other thing I noticed was when the students didn't have clear mastery during the convince me meeting, when they did not manage to convince me to improve their grade to an excellent level, it was extremely useful, much more efficient and effective than written feedback would have been. So we were able to really talk about what was confusing them, what was tripping them up, and help them. They almost all got an E on whatever way they tried to demonstrate mastery the next time. The other thing I noticed is the students almost always had a couple minutes left at the end of the meeting. And after they had improved their score on one of the objectives, they were really excited to ask me questions about the objectives they were most confused about. And I hypothesized that the confidence boost from being successful when demonstrating mastery about something really emboldened them to try and figure out the thing that was confusing them most in class. So I thought it was great, and I plan to do it again, whether we're online or face-to-face in the fall. I think that's what I had.
Thank you very much. Yep, this is it. We have a few questions that are all related here. So I'll try to combine a couple of these together. Can you say sort of how many appointment slots, how many opportunities, how long they were, sort of like the numbers going with those?
So I played around with it throughout the semester. Some of my appointment slots were 30 minutes because this was also the same. I have just one appointments calendar. And so that 30 minutes seems like the right amount for students who are like doing an office hours appointment, but that was too long for these. 15 minutes was not quite long enough. I settled right around 20 minutes, but I think if you didn't want those few minutes for students to ask questions at the end, 10 to 15 minutes would have been more than sufficient. But they always wanted to chat with me a little bit after they finished the actual like oral exam part of the meeting.
Thank you. There are a couple other questions I would encourage. If you asked a question that hasn't been answered yet, please message Christy directly, and she might be able to help you on that. I just want to say I've used something similar, and this is a fantastic thing. It makes office hours a joy. Like, I actually really love this. So thank you very much. We're going to move to our next presenter. We have two more. So Rebecca Gasper, speaking on the application of XP.
Thank you. And over here, I'm just going to give a big overview. This is an idea by Mariah Bergen. She gave it at a Math Fest and then an Iowa thing, but I get asked about it all the time because I do it. And I'm like, it's Mariah's idea. Anyway, I want to share it. I have been tweeting the conference on Twitter. I'm at Random Cashew. And the idea, the big over idea of this XP is we're going to give out participation points on tickets, physical paper tickets. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So at the beginning of the semester, I print a bunch of these rectangles. I just draw rectangles in Excel because why not? And I cut them apart, and they're pretty big. And I'll give them to any student at the beginning of the class on a rotating basis. And when we come to a point in the class where we're ready for a big discussion, you know, I'll moderate and I'll say, okay, what do you think? And what do you think? And do you have something to add? But I might say, that's a great response. I'm going to give you 2 XP. You were really thorough and you tied these ideas together. Standard responses would kind of be 1 experience point. Something that really goes above and beyond is 3, but also something that is a productive failure for the class gets 3 points. So a productive failure is basically when a student gets it wrong. That's the easy way to say it. But it's a productive failure, or it's just productive for the class to see this other way of looking at things and to try and see, you know, where we're going with this and how to correct it, because it's helpful to everyone. So the speaker will sign their name on the back of the ticket after the ticket giver gives them the tickets. And at the end of the day, I collect them all and I see, okay, today was whatever it is. It's June 5th and Mark got 1, and I go through the grade book and I just add points. But the fun thing is this rotating student passes all the cards out, and eventually they start doing my job for me. So that means they'll start identifying and thanking the speaker. They'll say, that was 1 XP, right? They'll say, whoa, that was a productive failure. Awesome job. Thanks for participating. That really helped us. Or they'll say, they don't add the tickets to the gradebook, that's still me. But they'll start taking on some of the instructor responsibilities. So it's kind of like a peer review where they're thinking about this rubric scale, and they're thinking about how they would assess themselves, and they're thinking about just what's expected in class, and that gives them more opportunity to participate next time. That rotating hander outer is a speaker in the class. So it helps tremendously. Mariah's here. Hi, Mariah. It's nice to, I saw you in the other sessions as a name, but this is definitely Mariah's idea. Okay, next slide, please. So the way I roll this in is I've done it with grade bundles, and Creighton had this crazy scheme where it was grades and grade pluses, but no minuses. So you could ignore most of this. But the idea is to get a plus, I required so many engagement credits. I have to redo this for the next semester because we now have minus grades. And the next slide, just previewing, is going to show some of the things I'll do online with it. But the idea is just to put the engagement credits in there. In a class of 18, I asked them for 20 engagement credits as sort of a baseline, and 30 engagement credits would be awesome. Okay. Next slide, please. So as I move online, the way that I'm looking at modifying this is, if we're doing it in a Zoom, we could just have a person give 1, 2, 3 emoji, or just type 1, 2, 3 in the chat. If we're doing it in a discussion board, another student can do the same thing. Like, you are the moderator for this discussion board, and they'll type in how many XP or something like that. It's pretty easy to adapt this. We actually have just gotten notice that we're going to be back on campus, but we're going to be flipping back and forth. So in this sort of high flex model, or you have to be on campus these days, and then we'll switch to offline or online for 2 weeks, it's going to be able to translate pretty directly, which I'm very happy with. So this is my idea for an online application. I'm still working through it, and I have to redo my grade bundles, of course. But participation can be part of a grade bundle. And that's all.
Thank you very much. If there are any quick questions for Rebecca, you can type them in the Q&A. I love this idea. I noticed a number of comments going past in the chat, just saying how fantastic a way this is to help students assign competence, right? That it puts it in the hands of the students, and that's amazing. So there's a question from Keenan. Is productive failure worth the most XP of all, right? So is that, in terms of sort of balancing it, is that your goal?
Yes, it is the worth the most of all. If someone takes over the whiteboard and does a whole big solution for like 20 minutes, I'm like, that's 3 XP. But if anyone has a productive failure, it's also 3 XP. It was a way that a lot of students caught up at the end of the semester because they realized they had to talk. And then they realized talking maybe when they were half ready was still better than no one talking at all. So it is worth the most on purpose. And what's fun is on the back of the cards, you see who else is signed in on it. It's like having a textbook, like, oh, it was this student the year before. It was this person the day before. And so they see that history and that social connection.
I think you've partly addressed another question that came up is there an issue with students who are more hesitant to speak out? And you mentioned they see that they need to. Did you experience that early on, though? Students who need to speak out in larger groups?
It was sort of that they need to. Now, when we have more discussion boards, it'll be a way for students who don't want to speak up, and it would cause them great distress to participate that way too. So I feel like that's flexible, but I haven't had problems. And also for mine, it was just the difference between a B and a B+, which might matter to some people. And if they want that B+, they were invited to speak in that particular semester.
I've often said something similar in IBL classes where I want a certain number of presentations or something, is that there are multiple opportunities that you have to take advantage of some of them in order to make this happen. We do have one last question, which is just a quick, how many do you typically give out in a class?
There are days where the mini lectures turn into 2/3 of a class lectures, and there are days where the mini lectures are 5 minutes, and you could tell which ones they participate and discuss more. So it could be, there are days where I've handed out like 25 different, or had them hand out like 25 different participation cards to enter in my gradebook. But there are also days where I've handed out 1 or 2. It varies. I just print a slew and be ready to print more.
Thank you very much. We are going to move to our final presentation, which will be by Asia Matthews on on formative peer assessment. So Asia, are you ready?
There we go. Okay, so I know that lots of people do peer assessment in their classes, and I'm just going to tell you about the ways that it has been successful and the ways that I'm trying to make it more successful in mine. My goal in the class that I'm thinking about right now is one of the major goals is getting them to really think about their own work, which is the metacognitive aspect. So I'm going to actually go through all of these words and explain what I mean by all of these. So formative assessment, by that I mean the feedback that you receive is, well, this is what I would say to a student. The feedback you receive is to help you understand what you could do to make your arguments more clear, concise, convincing, whatever it is that I want their arguments to be. And I'd like to tell them it's unlikely that you'll do well at first, because many students come into my classes not having been taught how to argue their own ideas in mathematics. And so that's the formative part of the assessment, is I have to make it very clear to my students that we're going to do this activity because I want you to learn stuff. It's not because I want to assess, you know, or I want to do less grading myself. It's because I really want you to start thinking about your own work. So the peer part is reinforcing peer-to-peer argumentation takes the focus off getting it right. For the teacher, like many students like to present their information to the teacher, but what is it that you wanted? And getting away from that and getting to their actual audience, which is their buddies, their peers. At the beginning of my class, I talk a lot about authentic mathematics and what that means in terms of, say, what a research mathematician does is, in order to create new mathematics, there's this like cycle that we go through in order to create knowledge in mathematics. And it starts with, you know, I would read a bunch of things that are already written down, and I would think about them, and then I would put them together in new and interesting ways. Now, in order for that, I would write it, and then I would write it down. Then I write something down. And it's not yet new mathematics. I might think it is, but it's not yet, because I haven't put it out into the community to be validated. And then, so I have to put that out into the community, and the community has to validate it in order for it to be accepted into the body of written work, or also known as mathematical knowledge. And so I talk a lot about this with my students, about how this works in terms of like how mathematics, professional mathematics happens. And so I say, you know, we're going to do that in this class. And the people who are reading the journal articles and who are editing the submissions to be published and that sort of thing are your peers. And so you have to give your peers the opportunity to understand your work and give you feedback, so that you can see if what you've created is in fact going to be accepted into the body of knowledge that we are constructing in this class. So that's where the peer part comes in. This really is a a group effort. And then we're going to go up to my sort of subtitle here, developing. I do my first peer assessment on day 3, when my first assignment is due. Now I teach on a block system, so our classes are 18 days long, which is different from a semester system. Although it's about the same amount of hours in class, it's just a lot shorter. So a day is kind of like a week in a semester system. But anyway, so I have my first assignment due on day 3, and that first assignment is when my students do peer assessment of each other's work, and it helps. And I have them do it with a rubric that I use to grade their work, and that this also serves a second feature of getting them used to the rubric. So the metacognition part is that peer assessment done well reinforces reflective habits, self-regulation. Some of this stuff was written in one of the articles that we were to look at as our homework for this conference. And then the communication part, I've already talked about this, like the communicating or articulating or arguing your mathematical ideas is sort of one of the biggest focuses of my courses. And so we generally argue on paper. And so that's why I have the students assess each other's written work. However, I am thinking about bringing this into actually our oral stuff as well. Do you want to switch slides now for me? So here are some of my students. And you can see a little bit of, well, I'm going to read this for you because it's very hard to actually read my students' writing, but this is feedback that they have written on each other's work. Everything is very clear. The only problem we had was in visualizing the column shifts, including arrows that indicated which direction the columns were moving. Would have been very helpful. I think that's what that says. And then they actually gave it points, which I did not ask them to do, but okay. And this is an indication of like they do sometimes have a really good idea of what's useful to them and what is not in terms of reading each other's work. Sometimes they're really far off, but this saves me the time of writing these sorts of things, like your grammar made it difficult to follow your method and disrupted the flow of your write-up. Like, I don't know, now I don't have to say that. But it's true, you know, if you don't write complete sentences, it's harder to understand what you're saying. And now they're not getting it from me, they're getting it from each other. So that it makes it really, I think, a lot easier for them to sort of digest and focus on. The emphasis in these assignments the emphasis is, a lot of it is sort of structural things, like, can you create a mathematical structure that represents the ideas that you're trying to get across? But also the articulation stuff, and also organization of your thoughts. How well do you put it into different chunks that make it easy for the reader? So that's a lot of stuff that goes into what I'm trying to get out of these assignments. So I will introduce this in the class and say, you know, you're gonna read each other's work and comment on it. Every time I do this, I think, oh my God, I don't have time to do this. And every time I do it, it's so powerful and important and useful that I don't know why every year I have to remind myself how amazing it is, but I do. So in case you've done this before and forgotten how useful it is, do it again, because it really is so, so useful. So I basically give them very little direction. The two things I do that I think are really important are I send them off in groups, sometimes pairs, sometimes groups of 3, to look at each other's work. And I tell them I'm doing this because that way we have a little bit of sort of monitoring of each other's work, and I ask them to read it out loud to each other, which I find is quite useful for them to look at each other's work, read out loud, and then they can comment on their papers. And I don't tell them why we're doing it, because that happens next. Next slide. After they've done it, and it's taken like, I don't know, half an hour for them to mark one assignment, one problem, sorry, that is one problem. They come back and I say, okay, so why did we do this? And I have a list of things that I want them to bring up, but I don't say it, and they always come up with everything and sometimes more. And so the important things are, this is what the students say. It's really useful to see other people's mathematical arguments and communication. Oh, I never realized that the same thing could be said so many different ways. Yeah. The next one is, if you're using a rubric, this helps the students get way more familiar with it because they have to use it. My rubric explains what is included in good mathematical writing, but not how to do it well. So that sort of gives them a leg up on that. They also say things like the act of reading each other's work helps me to reflect on my own writing and how I could have said something more clearly. And then they say things like, oh, I also have a sense of how long it takes to actually read and carefully assess something that's poorly written. And now I see why I would want to write something that's very clear, because then it's easier to read. That's it. That's all I've got.
Great. Thank you very much, Asia. I think you answered a couple of questions on the fly as they were being asked, so excellent.
Great.
Thank you all for coming here, and I just want to say first, thank you to all of our speakers who on rather short notice were willing to do this and did an excellent job of it. And I'm going to remind you that we do have a completely optional, no agenda session coming up, or if you just want to hang out and talk with people, we'll do that starting at 6 o'clock Eastern time. Otherwise, we will see you tomorrow morning, again at 11 o'clock Eastern time. Have a good day. If we don't see you again, we hope we do see you again, and good night. I'm just going to show Asia's cute animals here while we're all leaving.
Good job, David. This worked great, I thought.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really sorry. I have no clue how I lost your slides.
Oh, no problem. It worked out fine.
It worked out fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a miracle how these things always work out. So,
yeah.
All right.
All right. I'll see you in the social.
By the way, I think you guys are doing a great job of modeling how this can be done online, which is
it's good to hear that. It's very good to hear that. I appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you for speaking. So also good to actually see you face to face after we, went through your paper and everything for the special issue.
I know, it's great to meet you.
I keep referring to your paper. I refer people to your paper because
that's wonderful.
A lot of questions about that. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a labor of love, and I was so excited to see the special issue. I'm like, I can actually write about this thing that I've just spent all this time on for apparently no other good reason than it's good for me. So it was nice to be able to learn from it. All right. Thanks, David.
All right. See you.